You have a background as an artist, so you were, in fact, is that one of your pieces behind you, or is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
So kind of large format visual arts is your background before getting into soil and farming and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I had a whole career as an artist in Europe and then also in the States, and this particular piece is actually done with a webcam that can move. So it's puzzled together from like thousands of little shots, and the robotic webcam just kind of you can steer it from an online interface, and then I manually put it together.
Oh, incredible! So it's a composite of all those images from the webcam.
Right.
Very cool. And it's sort of intimating your affinity for plant life and human being, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So and
you bird in it, but you don't see it maybe from this angle.
Oh no, not really. I'll have to stare at it some more. So you had a whole art career in Europe before you moved to the States, and so you grew up in Germany in the what looks like I actually looked at some of the Eifel region.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I looked at some photos of that region, and it looks beautiful. Just big rolling fields, and
yeah,
it seems like it's very agrarian sort of base there. Very beautiful.
Right.
So that influenced you, I'm sure, in your early career, right? And then you moved to, I think you were in New York for a while, and then you ended up in California, and that's when I met you, and you were working for Castellano, managing their farm, which is an organic farm, right?
Yeah, they're not certified, but they're basically even beyond organic. I mean, they just don't use any pesticides, weeds are your friends kind of thing.
Right. I remember it well because I've probably driven past that farm about 1,000 times. So it's
it's pretty impressive. 5-generation family farm.
Mm-hmm. Back when the Italians were pretty much the colonizers of Santa Cruz.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good people.
Definitely. And then on moving out to New Mexico about 2 years ago, something like that.
It's pretty much to the day, actually a few days beyond 2 years. Yeah, that we've been here.
And you're finding that there's quite a bit of interest in sort of organic and regenerative farming here.
Yeah, it's definitely there's a very receptive audience here, and when I came, I didn't know anybody. So in 2 years, I've been very lucky to meet a lot of really good people, impressive people, smart people who are concerned about our environment and how we are feeding ourselves, and the whole food system situation is of great interest to a lot of people here.
Mm-hmm. Because of really kind of, there seems to me like there's a lot of sort of multi-generational farm operations here too, going back to when this was Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm. And beyond, that's what I find so incredibly stimulating and interesting and fascinating and humbling, right? Mm-hmm. The traditions that have been here for thousands of years, the farming traditions, the gathering traditions, the traditions that you can't even put a Western name on, right? That we don't have in our farming vocabulary. We don't have a name for that type of planting that was done here by the Pueblo and the Navajo and the Mescalero people before any European ever set foot on the continent. It's very impressive, the kind of it's called sort of traditional ecological knowledge. And it's really a blossoming science, right? And we would really do well going back and looking more carefully at some of those techniques that tread lightly on the earth and still feed people.
Wow. So are you saying that there is still some of the farming principles that the Pueblo people and the Navajo used are still being incorporated in farming technology now here?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of a resurgence of that. A lot of Native people want to come back to those kinds of knowledge and tradition, and really use it to revitalize the land.
Uh-huh.
And of course it's woven into culture, so you can't separate it, right? And that is a beautiful thing. We find something quite similar among the Hispano people who have also been here for hundreds of years, not thousands, but hundreds, who also still, there's also still these amazing traditions of collaborative farming, sharing of the water, the acequia system, of course. And again, we can learn so much from that, because much of what we now call regenerative agriculture sometimes, it really has the possibility in it for a collaborative approach, where you share equipment maybe, or where you share the water for sure, you share the knowledge for sure. And it's a different kind of mindset than, each for their own.
Right. Okay. So it's a lot more like a, I don't want to use the word socialism at all, but it seems like more of a socialistic sort of approach to agrarian technology.
I don't know that I would describe it as that at all, actually. I've just read recently a wonderful book. This goes back to Native American views. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. I'm still reading it because I have to read it very slow. And it explains the gift economy versus the economy with money, right? And basically that if you give somebody something, you get something back more likely than not. Right. Whereas if something is you can buy something for very cheap, and you will rake it in because you think, oh, I got to get this cheap thing, right? I got to take advantage of that. But a gift, you will probably, if it's offered to you, you will probably just take what you need, and maybe even a little bit less, right? We all are conditioned that way. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to describe it without putting any labels on it. But it describes a different mindset that I think we have to deploy in order to save the resources that we have. And beyond that, in order to build the resources back that we already lost. Right.
And that I recall that gifting sort of culture is pretty deep in the Native American cultural system, where gifting is kind of it's like woven into their culture pretty deeply. So that kind of goes with the conservation mindset, because of maybe millennia of watching the seasons pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just embedded. I remember I did interviews with a Navajo farmer who's now become a very dear friend, and I was asking, so what does farming mean to you? How does it work in your traditional culture and stuff like that? The kinds of questions we ask. And he was just laughing, right? He's like, it's everything.
Oh, wow.
It's such a stupid question. It's such a, siloed question.
Right.
It teaches me a lot.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the questions that would come up, in our tour of the Pueblo, for example. It's like, did you really ask that? I mean, we kind of, I don't know, layers of ignorance are always astonishing to me. So.
Well, we're all conditioned, We grew up with our paradigms, with our education, the way it was.
Right.
but we can still learn from each other, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, so one of the things I was noticing or reading in a number of places on your website was about sort of soil conservation by like not non-till or of sort of cover crops and things that aren't sort of general practices in modern agriculture in the United States anyway. And I thought that was very interesting about just the number of microorganisms in topsoil, in healthy topsoil, or something like, I think I wrote the quote down here, is like, when 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, there are more microorganisms than people on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, 7 billion now? So that's just kind of a whopping number of microorganisms for such a small amount.
Crazy, I know, and we don't really consider it. I don't think we do. You are probably familiar with the trophic levels, you know, the trophic pyramid, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a terrible thing, really, because humans are usually at the top or some other, you know, big predator, and then you know, the food chain goes down. You know, the wolf eats the deer eats the grass gets fed by microbes, and usually though the microbes are not part of this pyramid. I've looked you know, all over the web to find a graphic that shows all the microbes, but right. You know, the reason it's still a good image is because you have fewer predators first. You know, the predators are fewer, and then as you go down it becomes more and more, but really on the lowest trophic levels, that's the microbes, and there's so many of them that, you know, if you sliced it in a cake form or something, you know, you would have, most of the cake would be microorganisms in right. the soil, but we don't consider it because we can't see them.
Yeah, I've heard that if you were to invent a bomb that would you know, destroy all of the human tissues that are part of our own organism, that there would be an exact outline of the human in microbes. Like you would still see the form of the person.
Oh, wow.
It's just completely filled with microorganisms, as the soil is. So, yeah, but I've only ever seen bugs at the bottom of the trophic pyramid. Like that's the biggest mass of creatures, but it would make sense that microbes would outweigh them.
Even more than the insects, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, what is really at the heart of my work here is again a little bit of a shift towards the thinking away from practices and the things that you actually do, like the no-till, like the cover crops, which is interesting, right? But at the heart of it is really to think about the principles behind it and then how they apply to your specific situation. Mm-hmm. The reason being, and I mean, especially in New Mexico, every situation is just so different. But the principles always apply. It's just then the localized knowledge, you'll have to maybe talk to your neighbor or figure it out yourself a little bit, how the specific practices apply to your situation. And that the beauty of that is that you can follow those principles wherever in the world that you are. They will always apply, but then they will have different iterations in practice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So I downloaded that app that was I didn't write down the name of it, but see if I can find it. So, you know, I did land PKS, that's it. Right. So I downloaded that to see how my soil was here, and it was, doesn't seem like there's much reports for it because we're out in the desert here, but I thought that was fantastic to have created a cell phone app where you can really find out what your soil specifically is like anywhere on Earth. And
yeah, that's a pretty interesting project. It's called Land PKS, and it's actually developed here in New Mexico. But it's, again, you can use it all over the world. And in fact, it's kind of mostly used in Africa. And it allows you, indeed, it walks you through the steps to figure out what kind of starter soil, you should say, really, you have, because of course, certain things are a given when you talk about soil that you can't change, like the physical components of soil, that is just like, and that's what this app tells you, okay, you are in this region, so this is what, this is the name of your soil. And then there's other things that you can change. So the chemical and the biological components, so there's these three components that you can change with management. So, whether or not you graze, whether or not you put, compost on, or what organic matter, or whatever, that really changes the composition of the soil, the biological composition of the soil. And that can go pretty fast, because those little critters in the soil react to whatever you're doing. And that can really make a big difference.
Sure. And especially if you're planting your victory garden. And I suppose what got me very interested in that is I started a garden here in the house in the airship. And the plants are growing really, really, really slowly, but because I just don't really know much about soil at all. But an interesting statistic was that during the Great Depression, I think I read this off your site or some other site that you linked to, that about 43% or something of all the vegetables and fruits grown in the US during the Great Depression were people's own gardens. And I was like, what? Like, is that really true?
It's impressive.
It's impressive that people had that kind of ability and knowledge and necessity during that period of time. And that was the Dust Bowl, right? Because like all the farms just kind of dried up and blew away. I don't want to say all of them, but huge percentage.
Yeah, it was after the Dust Bowl, like 10 years after. So it was really after, during World War II. And because the big factories and the big farms were supposed to grow food for, the soldiers, and that got shipped to Europe. Then, it was kind of the people at home, that was their contribution to victory, right? To grow their own food, and with that lessen the burden on our own farmers to feed them. And I think we really need to do that again. I mean, this COVID crisis has shown us so clearly how those extended food chains are just too vulnerable, and the concentrated mega, corporations that are dominating our food, the kind of food that you just buy in the supermarket, that has just exploded. There was all these outbreaks in the meat packing industry, and it's just laid bare all the vulnerabilities that were there before, but then now I think for the first time we're actually experiencing them, and that makes me actually very hopeful. To your point of the victory garden, the seeds are sold out, the plant starts are sold out. Everybody's gardening, it seems, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it seems like a visceral sort of maybe fear or anxiety response to, oh my God, there could be no food. And you see it in the shelves, and the stores are like empty. Like they didn't have any of my tortilla chips, my favorite kind, for like 4 weeks.
Right, I know.
The store here, I started to panic. It's like, I don't have to grow corn now.
I know. It's something, but on the upside, the local food chains that are much shorter, right, much more direct, they are prospering. I mean, some of them took hits in terms of, if you direct market to the restaurants and stuff, then you had to retool, and that definitely wasn't always easy. But I think we all have plenty of examples. I know Taos has a wonderful food shed, right? They have like this food hub, and it's a shining example. Really, I think we need that in every community in New Mexico. But people locally were able to regroup, to come together, form cooperatives real quick, come up with the CSA, and CSAs are overbooked. You know, those are the boxes that you can order online mostly, or you just call in or whatever. Those are the
one we got I think it starts next week.
Yeah, I signed out too, and I know one CSA went from 30 boxes to 300. So I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of awareness that has happening, and I'm hopeful that it will last and that it will make lasting change.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of changes that do need to be made, and I think that's why we're talking, and why I've heard a lot of discussion about just you know, the farm industry and you know, how to help farmers stay solvent. One of the things I read, I believe also on your site, was that in 2019, U.S. farm bankruptcies hit an 8-year high. So that was kind of a big, staggering statistic. Like, you know, that's last year. So then this COVID thing's happening, and I imagine that's not making the situation any easier.
No, and that's a really good point. So I'm part of this grassroots advocacy group that I helped found when I came here. It was really it sprouted out of the ground, you know, very, very vibrantly and quickly. And we are behind the sort of the driving force behind the Healthy Soil Act, which, you know, put in place the Healthy Soil Program here in New Mexico, which now had its first round of grants that were awarded through the Department of Agriculture, that's the department that, you know, is responsible for this program, and they did an amazing job in getting it off the ground within 1 year, and really getting the first round of funding out to farmers and ranchers. But that is one area, the policy area that we work in. The other area that's also really, really important, and you just mentioned, is the economic side of farming and how dismal that is, right? I mean, it's just like treated like a labor of love for the most part, you know, that it's not even looked at as a business that for lots of farmers is their second business, or, you know, something that they do at the side or on the weekend. They do it out of, you know, pure love and because it's been in the family, maybe the land for a long time, and those kind of things. And it's really hard to make a living on it. So we have a graph, and I wish I had prepared a little better, but it shows the U.S. farm income since the 1900s, roughly. And then also, so it shows, you know, the inputs, right? What you have to put into your business, and then what is left over at the end of the day for you. And so usually, you know, the two of them go kind of like this, right? They go kind of parallel. They move along like that. And then after the Second World War, again, you know, we all know that's when industrial agriculture happened, really, when the chemicals came on board. Basically, after World War II, there was lots of nasty stuff left over from, you know, bomb factories and stuff like that. And those chemicals make good fertilizer, you know. Wow, there was the Green Revolution, you know, things really took off in the fields, right, for a short time. But then, you know, it declined, the growth declined. And also you need to put more and more in of those chemical fertilizers, and then more and more pesticides, more and more herbicides, because you get the super weeds. So those input costs, because all of that is expensive, right? They climb, and then the profit declined. So right now we are in this sort of decline where the line goes down, whereas the inputs for farmers go up and up. And so this is the loss that they're facing year after year, and it gets bigger and bigger.
Right.
You know, that's the industrial agriculture model right now. Whereas if you are farming with healthy soil in mind, yes, you will have inputs, but they're generally not as expensive, and you are farming for the long term. You're really building your soil, and you're farming for those microbes who will feed your soil. And it's a lot cheaper, and after a certain transition phase, which usually is quite quickly, you get out of the red and into the green. into
Right.
making more profit.
Right, and what I read something like the yields were much higher with, with some of the healthy soil practices.
So this is an interesting one because we are so conditioned to think about yields, right? And that is again the industrial agriculture model.
Yeah.
The yields can actually be lower.
Okay.
I mean, I will be frank, the yields can be lower. It depends. Again, I mean, you can't just generalize. But what is higher is the profit margin.
Oh,
Because
okay.
you don't have this kind of high input. So yes, maybe you will have less bushels of corn, but maybe it's better corn for one thing. You can market it as organic corn, or if you are certified, or you can ask more for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you will have not that much input. So what is left over for you at the end of the day is more. But we're conditioned to think about yield only and not about profit. What is left for the farmer at the end of the day?
Right.
That's the important figure, right?
It keeps you doing it, I suppose. I mean, I think in terms of success being not only the financial gain, but also the the will to keep doing something is, I think, a measure of success. And that doesn't have a real dollar figure attached to it, in my view.
That is so important. You're so right. And besides the economics, the kind of farming that I think we need to move towards is also hugely more satisfying. We hear that all the time with people who've changed their ways. Some of them are very outspoken about their transformation in their lives, that they love again what they do. Most farmers love the land. They don't want to destroy the land, and it hurts. You can see that the soil is not healthy, and it hurts. And then when you see the wildlife return, or when you see we have springs that start running again, that is a joy, right? And when you can provide a prosperous and a lasting way of life for your family, that is a joy. Sure. Yeah, you cannot put a price tag on that.
No, I suppose you can kind of see the land come back to life if you're sort of in the process of transitioning back to healthy soil practices. Like, I mean, I would imagine that. I have very little experience living in farming conditions, but I noticed that in permaculture, for example, it really felt like quite a small farm was just so alive because of the attention that they were giving the land and how they're remediating, broken pieces of the plot and whatnot.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we work with ranchers that have a lot of land, so it doesn't have to be a small. Sometimes, this kind of farming and ranching gets the rap of being only for small scale operations, but that is not the case. We work with one rancher who has 250,000 acres. So not all of that is yet, quite there yet. But what these people are telling us is that you can see, like I said, the wildlife return, the grasses return, the native grasses. It's incredible, the biodiversity that comes back. In this case, through really planned grazing, and you graze in different ways, more modeled after the herds of the past, right? So you see incredible changes in the ecology of your land.
Yeah, I can imagine. We live in a pretty, I would say, arid climate, and at least in my neighborhood. But I'd recalled a TED Talk I saw by Alan Savory. Do you know him?
Yeah.
About desertification or remediating or reversing desertification by grazing animals. Very, very selective grazing, and it was kind of incredible. Like just in a pretty short amount of time, 3 or 4 seasons, they just reversed desertification by grazing.
Yeah, so that's Alan Savory is really at the heart of the kind of grazing that restores the land. he has a little bit of a bad rap in New Mexico. He actually worked in New Mexico for a long time. Yeah, and there's still a lot of people that have studied with him. So it's very interesting to meet those original disciples, but his findings are really sound. And then now, because it's been many decades that they've been put into practice, we have a lot of examples of people, who may not call it the savory method or whatever, but they actually do use it. You have lots of different titles for it now. Some people call it cell grazing or adaptive management, or adaptive multi-paddock grazing. That's another one, a little mouthful for you. We usually refer to plant grazing because for us, we include the whole ecosystem planning. Not just paddocks, but more than that. And then we have actually here in New Mexico, based in Albuquerque, the Holistic Management International, which is a savory outgrowth nonprofit that comes from that method. So there's a lot of knowledge in this state that we're tapping into. We put together, we're growing it right now, a soil health champions network.
Okay,
We bring together the kinds of people that do this kind of work to talk amongst each other, to learn from each other, and to hopefully widen the circle by helping each other out, doing sort of barn raising type events once we can gather again.
Right.
So for the time being, we're doing it virtually, but on Zoom like we are now. But eventually it will be physical gatherings again. And that's really, I think, essential in growing this movement, because it is a movement, it's not just, again, it's not just each for their own, but it's really something we do together, and that we hope will really sweep the state and change things.
So it's a bit along the lines of that knowledge sharing that we talked about with the native peoples, and it seems like it's very much a goodwill and sort of forward thinking. So knowledge sharing, I guess, is really the part of the ecosystem that we don't really consider when I think of farming. I don't really think of the sort of networking that I'm involved in, which is mostly internet knowledge sharing, but it's really a whole ecosystem on its own.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, there is a lot of social pressure on farmers to do things the way they've been done, and most farmers, especially in New Mexico, are over 60. Our average age in New Mexico, the average farmer age is 62, which is the second oldest in the nation. So that's a really troubling statistic. And of course, as we get older, we change less easy, it's just a fact. And so you need encouragement, you need to feel safe about changing your practices, your way of farming. And it's risky. I mean, it's your business, it's your life, it's your home. It's what you leave behind for your family. So there has to be a support network that allows you to do that and gives you the confidence to go ahead with it. And so that's what we're trying to set up.
And would any of those changes be sort of influenced by the fact that, I mean, a lot of farms are very dependent on government subsidies or farm insurance, and that could be kind of a sticky area, right? Because moving to new practices, then do you still have that support available? I mean,
okay, Trey, how long do we have? No.
We're like almost 45 minutes now, so I realize that's a huge other
No. Joke aside, this is a great question. You nailed it, because, oh my gosh, in terms of federal policy, there's so much that is working against this kind of change. And so you're absolutely right. I didn't mean to. The insurance situation is troubling, and it's very troubling that certain industries, I mean, whole industry, like the whole crops are dependent on those subsidies. And that is a situation that has kind of crept in, and I don't think anybody enjoys it, but there it is, you know, and it is perpetuated again by you know, the industrial model that has been in place since the Second World War. And it is something that we have to break. And I think there is now really so much momentum behind that, and so many people do see the light on the wall about that, that if we would put the kinds of subsidies that now go to corn and soy that grows not even food for the most part, it's feed or it's fuel, and it's feed for cows that can't even digest it right, and that kind of meat is not even good for humans. Not very good, at least. So, you know, so there's so much wrong with all that. But if we took that kind of money and we would put it into incentives for farmers and ranchers to actually grow in a healthy and conscious way that is better for the environment, better for their pocketbook, better for the human health of the people who eat this kind of food, and better for the animals too.
Right.
Well, we would change the world.
And we would probably increase our resistance to things like COVID-19, for example, because the health of the soil. So we're talking about the pyramid again. It's like the health of the soil, the health of the animals, and the plants growing in the ground.
Right.
I mean, it's not a huge leap to make, I suppose.
It's a trickle-down effect, but there's more to it, actually. There's now studies that have found that we've lost an enormous amount of nutrients in our food. They are not, so we may eat a tomato, but the same tomato is not as nutritious as it was before industrial agriculture. And that is because industrial agriculture, with the chemicals in the ground and the fertilizers, it does not rely on the microbial life in the soil. And in fact, a lot of those chemicals work against the microbes, even kill them, are harmful to them in the soil. But at the heart of what we're talking about is really the amazing and wondrous and beneficial exchange between plant and soil organisms. And if you, and those soil organisms get all those micronutrients that we as humans actually really rely on. Zinc is a really good example, which is almost non-existent anymore, because a plant that's fertilized just with chemicals cannot actually produce that. Whereas a plant that's fed by soil organisms will have enough of it and can pass that on in its fruit to us who eat it. So that's, I mean, it's a whole emergent science, and it's very troubling. And it's probably part of, I mean, it's at the heart of all these diseases that are systemic diseases, like diabetes, like cancer, like obesity. All of those are, you know, making us less able to fight any infection, and COVID in particular. So it's all connected, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're trying to do, is just raise awareness, and that's what drives the whole the wheels of progress, right?
Yes.
We're on the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it just seems that, I mean, it was staggering to me that I didn't really put together how connected the industrial farming is to the economy, and how those two things really are, they're sort of like the elephant in the room, you know, and I can't believe that I haven't heard more talk about this, but
yeah, everybody kind of goes along with it. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of lobbying power behind those huge agro businesses. In New Mexico, we're kind of lucky because we're flying a little bit under the radar, but you know, you and I moved here from California, where that is not the case. I don't, you know, that's, you can do things here in New Mexico that you could never do in California, because it's just so much more of a political power there, you know. And then if you look at the US in as a whole, you know, those chemical companies have an incredible amount of power, and they will not yield it, you know, easily.
No, I think the Rachel Carson story is definitely an indication of that, for sure. And I urge everybody to watch. There was recently a movie made about her that, I mean, just blew me away. Really, really good and sad story too.
Yes, and sadly, still so relevant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As relevant as ever, especially now.
Yeah.
So.
She's one of my heroes.
Well, mine too. I didn't even
Yeah.
know her. There's one of my guests in the future, in probably a couple of weeks, is going to be Kevin, who worked at the Rachel Carson College at UCSC.
Wow.
Energy policy guy and a lecturer there. So
That's great. You know a lot of interesting people.
I tend to collect them. So and it's just great to talk to people who have, you know, passion for what they're doing. And so I appreciate that you have that and have inspired me, definitely. And one of the friends I have that inspired this move out to New Mexico and in the airship. So we'll be having more discussions offline, of course, about developments here, but we're going to start some very interesting farming, gardening operations here.
I'm so psyched. I want to come out and help, and you know, dig my hands into the soil and see what we can do together.
Awesome. I'm really happy about that. There's a few other people around that you'll meet, that I will meet as well. I haven't yet, but who have their hands very deep in the dirt. So we'll spread that around. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. It's almost noon. I'm sure we could talk for hours, but I appreciate you making yourself available for this. And if you had any other closing remarks or anything about what you're doing, it'd be great to know. I will mention also your website, which is nmhealthysoil.org, right?
Correct. Yeah.
MexicoHealthySoil.org.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. The only thing is, I would encourage people to check out the soil health principles. I do have them here. There's like 5 of them. As they apply everywhere, you know.
Yeah.
Anybody, anywhere in the world can implement them and just get growing something. That's the most important thing.
Definitely. It's definitely changed my life in a few short weeks to have a garden, because, you know, there's things like chard, which I love to eat, and now I'm growing it, and it's so easy. It's like, my favorite food is right there. I can just getting that relationship with the soil and the fertilization and with natural stuff, and watching how much water I use and all that. It definitely changes your perspective on life, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you made this move at exactly the right time. It's amazing kind of foresight on your part, you know. But
myself away on this one.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's so important to consider yourself part of the ecosystem as well. And again, that goes back to maybe we started the indigenous way of thinking is, you know, we're not separated from nature. And that makes all the difference, right? And again, to consider the whole cyclical nature of things, rather than, you know, looking at slices of it and silos and all of that. And I find that is the most satisfying piece of it, changing my own mind, it's changing my own way of thinking, and expanding in that sense has been very satisfying, very fun.
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, word to the wise, if you care about yourself, then study these principles, because it's makes your whole experience so much better. And just happy to be alive during a pretty scary time of human history, for sure. So, and get those CSAs, and support local farmers, and make organic soup, for God's sake. Really take care of yourself. It only gets better. That's what I think, anyway. So
So good.